Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yakker. My guest in today's show is ET experiencer and UFO researcher Ella LeBain, author of the six-part series Who's Who in the Cosmic Zoo. I'll be talking with Ella about the expanded and revised fourth edition of Book One in the series. Ella LeBain, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
It's good to see you, Stan. Thank you for having me.
Aliens a threat? Are they our friends or foes? Are they here to harm us or help us? Opinions on that seem to vary greatly. What, Ella, is your take on ETs? Are they friend or foe?
Yes, it's so true. There's a lot of differences here of opinion. My book is about discernment. I sort of categorize those who are the friendlies and those who are the foes. It's a mixed bag, just like us humans. We're not all, there's a lot of evil people and then there's a lot of good people, thank God. I think that the ETs are no different, especially if you believe in this premise that we were star-seeded, so we're representatives of them. Children, parents having babies and putting different races in playpens to play together. When toddlers play together and you have a black child, a white child, an Oriental child, a Jewish child, all these different races, they don't care. Toddlers don't differentiate. They're just into playing. Their hearts are open. They're loving. I think that that's, to me, an analogy of all of us being put together on this planet as an experiment for the galaxy, even to try to get along, because there's all these different races here that are all coming through the human race. So the one thing we all have in common is that we're all human. Well, maybe some, not so much, because there's that aspect of the artificial intelligence, the reptilian presence that basically possess humans and make people think that they're human, but they're not. So that's where discernment comes in. And what Yeshua taught was, by their fruits you will know them. What are the fruits of the Spirit? And one thing we can see to distinguish between an alien and a human being is our soul. We were created with souls, which is something that they are trying very hard to counterfeit and replicate. So they steal pieces of us, our memories, and they are able to do this. This is a technological thing they do, is they can take pieces of our memory and put it into someone else. This was depicted in the movie Total Recall. Remember, they were playing around with all this stuff. That's another truth is stranger than fiction, because this really does go on. I think, and it makes it even harder for us to discern, is this a friend or a foe? But when you really get to know someone and you see, well, what kind of spiritual fruits do they have in their life? Are they cold? Are they self-serving? Are completely like narcissistic, where they have no empathy, no compassion for other creatures or other humans? That's a big red flag to say, well, that has something to do with either someone's being completely possessed, they've lost their soul is being buried and something else has taken over. Possession is a very real thing. I want to mention also Bob Lazar. And one of the things he's said and shared in his interviews is that the aliens that he was experienced, that they refer to us humans as containers. So that's like a really big piece of this, because go back into the scriptures talk about us being vessels, containers, kind of the same thing. And even C.S. Lewis said, you're either owned by God or countered by Satan. There's no neutral ground in the universe. These beings know that. They know how we're made. They know how we're wired. And one thing we didn't talk about, or I just want to insert this in for clarity's sake and understanding, is that we were, this is what the Sitchin material has basically taught me, is the Anunnaki came to genetically manipulate, not create. I prove how I distinguish my work from Sitchin is that I proved in my conclusion in book one that we were not created by the Anunnaki, but we were absolutely genetically manipulated by them. The manipulation was a downgrade because they wanted to create a slave race. So when you look at the beginning of the Bible, everyone lived to be like 960. You look at the genealogy, and there were all these like 900 years old people. And then the floods of Noah came. And then after the floods of Noah, they started all over again with Noah's family. And human beings didn't live past 120 if they lived a healthy life. That's where the telomeres went. So that's a genetic manipulation right there, is to take longevity away. They changed us in some form or another. Because my opinion about all of this, based on what the geneticists have been looking at our DNA, what they see, and how they say we have this double strand, these two strands of DNA, and then the rest they call junk DNA. That's because they don't know what to call it. But if you go back to the Adam and Eve story, it says that they were created in the image and likeness of the gods, both male and female, equal. Equality doesn't necessitate sameness. Male and female are not the same, but they're equal. And that they were walked in their glory bodies. They had it all. They had everything. They had this wonderful relationship with the Creator God. They were loved. They were favored. That's why the serpent was jealous of that, because the Creator God wanted to give the earth to this new set of humans, which we call the Evedemic race. The Lucifer, Satan, the serpent being, was like, nope, not having. He's going to take over. He's going to make them fall. He's either going to destroy them, or he's going to get them to rebel against God or sin. And that's what the Adam and Eve story tells us. Spiritual legal ground allowed this race of beings to come in and say, we'll take them here, we'll implant. And this is what Sitchin basically translated and interpreted from the Sumerian, that they mixed the DNA in these clay pots, and then they inserted them into the already existing earth women. So that right there tells us that they didn't create humans. Humans were already on the planet. Plus the fact that we have this whole civilization of Atlantis and Lemuria that happened way before all this. That's like a deeper history. That's why I don't believe that they created us, but they certainly manipulated us, and they're coming to harvest their own, just as Yeshua is returning to harvest his own. That's where this conflict, this final battle that we've come to know as Armageddon, which is another Hebrew word for a place in Jerusalem that is basically Har, meaning mound or mount. Megiddo, it was a field of blood. And this was an actual field outside of Jerusalem that the ancients used to come and meet to battle, kind of like a football game. We're going to meet there and we're going to see who's standing and who wins. That's where that word comes from. It's interesting because I pieced this together also from Sitchin, was that Jerusalem is an ancient space portal. This is why there's this eye of the storm always going around Jerusalem. If you've ever been to Jerusalem, everybody's living there. It's a confluence of all these religions. They're all living together, working together, riding buses together. When you're in the eye of the storm, it's kind of peaceful to a point, but they're fighting over this portal, this ancient space portal. And there's technology that's underground that is also going to surface. I was told about the prophecy. I was told back in the 80s, and I'll never forget this, when I was questioning this, it was like, God, how is this ever going to happen? They're going to build a third temple. That's what the prophecy says, a third Jewish temple in Jerusalem on the temple site. There's the Temple Institute in Jerusalem that is completely 100% ready. They have all the materials, everything. It's not about money. It's not about materials. They've got it all. What they don't have is the ability to do that because of the Muslim stronghold that's on that portal at the moment. So I'm like, except for a war, how is that ever going to happen? This is what I was told, that there was going to be an earthquake, and that the mosque, the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, was going to get destroyed. And that, see, the Muslims right now want to be part of this third temple. And then they come together and they rebuild it together. And that is a big, huge piece of this end time prophecy, because that has to happen in order for the next piece to happen. Like I said, they're chomping at the bit to do it. They just can't work it out, and it's going to be something outside of themselves. There's also technology underground. So when the earthquake happens, something surfaces. So in my fourth book, I published all this research about the Ark of the Covenant, which I named the book Covenants. I found that there were two. This is stuff that's corroborated by other researchers. One of them is underground in Jerusalem. They came very close to finding it, and the Israeli government shut them down. So this is all like historical facts because it's technology. So this is all part of disclosure because things are being unearthed all over the planet. They're seeing ancient relics on Mars, on the moon, and here on Earth. This is all part of what we're in disclosure. So this can go on for another couple of decades until all of this starts to come together. They're pieces. I don't think it's just like a one thing. It's going to be like multiple things, confluence.
Astronauts and U.S. presidents witnessed UFOs. Who were they, and what did they say they saw?
There's so many of them. Let's start with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, because he's our favorite, because he's one of the whistleblower Apollo astronauts. I met him in Florida in 1994. Him and Dr. Brian O'Leary were both working together on trying to help people to understand this. And they pioneered. They basically said, we're not alone. The Apollo 11 astronauts all saw what happened on the moon. All the astronauts are under NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and they're very strict about that because some of them have been threatened that if they went public or they told, or even on their deathbed, like Neil Armstrong died with his secrets because they manipulated him and pretty much blackmailed him because he felt so much guilt over his family and the divorce and all of that happened. And he said, well, if you even spill the beans on your deathbed, we're going to go after your family. So that's why he never spoke. But Al Worden, for instance, another Apollo astronaut, he didn't exactly divulge everything, but he certainly dropped crumbs and seeds. And I met him and I had a conversation with him and about this. And what we shared was our interest and love for Sitchin's material. He loved reading about Zecharia Sitchin. He pontificated about, who created who. And we had this conversation about that. And Al Worden was one of the astronauts who ran the command module. And when they landed on the moon, he was the one orbiting the moon, waiting for them, similar to Michael Collins. And when the two of them met, I saw both of them meet together, and they were both very sort of similar because they both saw the same stuff. And in their later years, which was 2019, I met them in 2019, and then 2020, Al Worden died. He got COVID. And then Michael Collins was very frail in 2019, and then he died not too long after. But I was following both of them. They were both planting seeds like crumbs. And Michael Collins would talk about, what if you found out that there was alien life, like without actually coming out and saying it. So there was a lot of that kind of speak between them. And then, of course, Gordon Cooper, Story Musgrave, they all came out with statements about that they saw UFOs, that we weren't alone. But I think the big story was William Tompkins, who was the NASA engineer that was working in the mission control room while Apollo 11 was on the moon. So there were two feeds. There was the public feed that everybody saw that came through, and then there was their dedicated private feed that he was in the room and he saw that and he sketched it, which I published in book 1, 4th edition. If everyone remembers the Apollo 11 drama, where Neil Armstrong had to manually land outside of the Sea of Tranquility, because they don't tell you this, but they were basically greeted by a fleet of spacecraft, and William Tompkins drew it, what they saw. And the spacecraft wasn't like literally on the lunar surface, it was just hovering. And the beings who piloted these crafts were standing next to their ships, and they were 9-foot tall lizard men. That was the big secret about the Apollo 11 moon landing. And of course, they let all the conspiracy stuff go out because it helped them to cover it up. Let people think they never made it to the moon. Let people think it was some Stanley Kubrick film, which did happen because they wanted something to save face in case they failed. But they succeeded beyond their imagination. So all this got covered up. But now we're going back to the moon. Now we have the Artemis mission. And now it's not just us. The Indians landed, the Chinese landed. So we're getting pieces from these other missions that don't necessarily bow to NASA. Same thing with the ESA, the European Space Agency. Our International Space Station is shared by 11 space agencies. So not everyone has to bow to NASA. And we've had one of the Spanish astronauts, I posted this 2 years ago, and I keep repeating it because it's pretty amazing, that they saw this huge, looks like wings, kind of like how I have my arms up, this craft that was hovering over the Earth in the upper atmosphere for May and June of 21. And one of the ESA astronauts who was in the ISS at the time, he recorded it. And once that thing goes on the internet, everybody copies it, and it's not. So you could see it. I've posted it multiple times. So we know that the cover-up, the truth embargo, whatever you want to call it, it's falling apart because there are pieces and there are people and there are other agencies that are not all on that same page.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy the expanded and revised 4th edition of Who's Who in the Cosmic Zoo, Book 1, A Spiritual Guide to ETs, Aliens, Gods, and Angels, or any of the other books in the series, how can they do that?
Well, thank you, Stan. You can go to my website, who's who in the cosmiczoo.com, or I'm on Amazon in worldwide channels. The books, all 5 books are available right now in Kindle and paperback. And I think if you have the audio subscription, you can probably get that on, I know book 2 you can get on audio.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen. I very much appreciate your support of my channel, and thank you for subscribing to it.